welcome to this afternoon session, everybody. If we could have you get to your seats. We're going to start with a little video from Atticus, and then I'll introduce our speakers.
Thanks everyone for attending, and I want to say thanks to OABA for putting on a great event. I'm Austin Mattern with Atticus. I'm your area business manager for all of Indiana and Ohio. So the video is going to kick off here, give a little background on our company, but as a highlight, we're a demand-driven generic post-patent manufacturer. We're bootstrapped, American-based, privately held. Our portfolio is over 90 active ingredients with over 312 different finished goods that are applicable to your businesses each and every day with your customers. So with that,
Atticus is a demand-driven manufacturer of branded post-patent products. We started in 2014 with a passion for the industry after several years of experience, and every year we've been building this business and really just wake up every day, leveraging our knowledge and network in an industry that we love.
I joined the team a little over a year ago. My first impression is that people and culture are important. The vision is to be the most relevant, simple, and reliable partner. We are more than the products that we sell. We truly help people enhance their daily lives.
I really feel great about Atticus and our focus on maintaining who we are, holding to our purpose, holding to our value proposition, and our core values. We live our cultural framework.
We want to make sure there's a relevant portfolio, we want to make sure there's a reliable portfolio, and we want to make sure that we are efficient in everything we do to deliver those products to our customer and make sure the experience is really enjoyable.
Our customers can expect a partnership that is centered around mutual benefit and a team that strives to be best in class at all times. Our team is driven to make a positive impact.
While the chemistry isn't unique, the Atticus experience is.
The ability to have a relationship directly with a manufacturer like Atticus, the transparency and the feel that the customer will have to the Atticus culture is something that sets us apart from our competition.
When you come to work for Atticus, we want you to feel that you're heard and you're seen and that we are taking care of the whole self. Loyalty isn't just bred from our employees to the company, it has to be from the company back to the employees as well.
There's no better place to do. If someone says, what is your passion and what does retirement look like for you, Randy? I say, you're looking at it because I'm living it.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Smith. I'll be your moderator for this afternoon. Please help me welcome Doug Gerber. He's the owner of Aero Advantage Drones. He combines his technology background and passion for drone innovation to deliver advanced solutions for agriculture and commercial industries. Second up, we'll have Robert Mullen, who I think we most know very well. He's the VP of the Ag Technology at Heritage Co-op. Robert received his BS in Ag Business with a chemistry minor at Cameron University in Oklahoma in 1998, as well as his MS in Plant and Soil Science and PhD in Soil Science from Oklahoma State University in 2001 and 2003, respectively. He has been a licensed drone operator since May of 2022. Please help me welcome Doug and Robert.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you can hear me. So my name's Doug Gerber, and I'm joined today by Paul Gillenwater from the FAA, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about what it takes to get certified and get these heavyweight drones for agriculture up in the air safely and legally.
Is that on? The only reason I ask is we are recording the session.
Yep.
Okay, does everybody hear it? Maybe it's just me.
Good.
Sorry.
Okay. So the first thing we want to do is kind of step through a couple of housekeeping items. We've got some pamphlets out here in the hallway, airspace, charts, different things from the FAA, links for some of the things we're going to talk about here today. Additionally, all the links that we're going to talk through today are available electronically as well as the presentation. Open discussion. So if you have a question, just shout it out. If you feel more comfortable, raise your hand. Please do. We just want to keep the dialogue going. And then if you have a question we can't answer for you today, we'll absolutely follow up with you. Just stop up here afterwards, give me your contact information, I'll be glad to reach out to you about that. So with that aside, just to get into the agenda here, we're going to talk about primarily the 137 certification. We're going to talk about drones in agriculture, how they're used, talk about the foundational certifications required. We're going to talk about what folks would need to start an agricultural business with drones, or if you have land and you want to hire a drone operator to spray that land, what you should look out for. So some key areas there, and then of course we'll move into the questions Q&A session. With that said, before we get started, just want to take a quick poll. Does anybody in here have their Part 107 already today? Excellent. Excellent. How about the 137? Great. This will be a good discussion. Thanks. All right, so let's jump right into it. How are drones used in agriculture today? You guys may know some of this, but just to recap, there's really three primary areas where drones are used in agriculture. Everybody's familiar with the autonomous application portion of it. That's where the drones, such as the one, the XAG on the table out there, are used to autonomously fly row crops. They can also spread cover crop seed as well. But that's the most commonly known one. There's two other areas that are really emerging in the space. Multispectral analysis is big. Next to the XAG drone out here, I noticed they had a Mavic 3M, and that is the multispectral camera payload, which does just that. It takes the pictures of the row crops, and it can use AI to define the health of the plant, including stand counts. So that information that's derived from that multispectral analysis is then created or made into a variable rate prescription. That prescription is then fed into the agricultural drone, where you can then do autonomous spot spraying, as well as variable rate applications. A few other areas just want to touch on. So we've talked about these four and talked about stand counts, but another emerging area drones are used in agriculture, livestock monitoring and environmental monitoring. So that's an up-and-coming thing as well. So you'll see a lot of movement, I believe, in that space here in the coming years. We should talk about the hype cycle. So if you've been following the drone scene for a while, you've probably seen that we went through this trough of hype cycle. So when drones came on the scene, it was really a discussion about farmers really don't need their land-based equipment anymore. They can get rid of that and just buy drones, and that'll take care of it. They'll be more efficient, better efficacy, they'll hit edge to edge. Well, we found out that didn't meet every scenario. You had to have a specific field type, field size, certain type of crop for that to be the most effective, right? And beyond that, then the effectiveness would drop. So whether that was the time it took you to spray the field or whether that was the efficacy, things would change depending on the size. That took us through the peak of inflated expectation and then trough of disillusionment we found ourselves in until some manufacturers came out with drone software that really started changing the scene. Operators got some of these drones in their hands, and they were able to determine really quick that they could do 20 to 30 hours consistently with those drones, or 20 to 30 acres an hour consistently with those drones. That took us into the slope of enlightenment to where we find ourselves today, the plateau of productivity. These things are efficient. We know what we're going to get out of it. We know which fields we can apply these to the most effectively. and the best way to, the best jobs to accept, and which ones the land-based equipment should still work with. So let's talk about the foundational certification that one would need to get their 137. It starts with the 107, and there's a registration component that affects all drones, and then there's the 107 operation definition that we're going to talk through here. So all drones over 250 grams need to be registered. That's even if you're flying it recreationally, right? Just need to get your registration, make sure you label it, you're good to go. Now, if you've got one of the smaller drones, that doesn't apply to you as long as you are flying it recreationally. If you get into the Part 107 operation, all drones have to be registered with the FAA. There is a link there for that. You'd see that on the link document, which is also provided electronically. So what's considered a Part 107 operation? So any operation outside of recreational, essentially. It's the best way to think about that. If you're going to make any money at all, you need a Part 107. So where some people get hung up with that a little bit is if you recreationally fly a drone, you take a drone video, you put that on YouTube, and you get a lot of views. You end up monetizing that video, and they send you $1 for it. Technically, that's not legal. You've got to have a Part 107 because you've made money. Any business you support would also require that 107 with that drone. So I'll pause there for any questions.
There's got to be a question on this issue.
Okay.
So Doug, I'm going to ask you the question. Maybe Paul can provide guidance because I don't know that I have a clear answer to it, but I get asked it all the time.
Yeah.
I'm a farmer. I have a drone. I fly it for my operation. Is that considered a recreational use or is that considered a commercial use?
Commercial business.
How many are surprised by that answer? You're just out flying around for the heck of it. Or you're catching some images of your family walking through the park. But the question that I always get that question because, well, it's my farming operation. I'm not, but you're using it for scouting. So I've always interpreted it as a commercial use, but I've never had any like great clarity in that.
The best way to get clarity is if you go to what is now called the trust test. It's the recreational UAS test where anyone who's going to fly a drone for their personal recreation by law now should be taking the trust test. I don't consider it an enforceable law, but it's a 25-question familiarity of airspace. The reason it's required is because these drones fly in the same airspace as manned aircraft. And so people need to know, even flying recreationally, where they can and cannot fly for safety reasons. So to answer the question of what is recreational and what is commercial, the trust test will cover that. That'll be one of your questions. It's correctable to 100%, so you can't fail it.
So what do you consider the drones flying over the houses? Are they residential or commercial? They're flying all over the state.
The national airspace is anything from a blade of grass to the edge of space. So the misconception is that the airspace over your property is yours, and it's not.
You don't own it. Any other questions in this space? Because this.
Is the 0.55 pound, is that like a kid's toy, or is that, what's the threshold?
No, so have you seen the DJI, the Mavic Minis? Those are all less than half a pound. And we use those commercially for scouting. Yeah. The toy ones, we won't talk about drone. The toy ones are, if you're spending less than $100 on a drone, good luck. And that's all I'll say.
Less than 6 of them.
Well, I'm a little more forgiving, I guess.
And something to bring up too, anything indoors or under roof, it's not considered a national airspace. So if you're flying in barn space or chicken coop, large chicken operations or something like that, that's also not part of the national airspace, so no rules apply there.
So there's no rules apply. Can you shoot them down then?
Yes, under roof.
Under roof.
If they're under your roof, that's considered on your property. That's correct.
No, those are registered aircraft. And I know there's things going in press releases and that kind of stuff right now, so I don't know. I'll just say it's a very live situation, and that's all I
Sorry, Doug, I didn't mean to.
No, it's good
I
conversation.
just knew that that was going to be something that
Oh,
was
yeah.
going to come up, so.
Yeah, any other questions? This is good, good conversation. All right. Let's talk about the requirements for the Part 107. We're just going to touch on this. This is that foundational certification that you need to make any money at all, and that's with a lightweight drone or heavyweight drone, doesn't matter. You have to have this one first. You just have to be a certain age. You got to speak English and write English, physical and mental condition to operate the drone safely, and then register on the FAA website and receive an FTN number. Then the big one is schedule your Part 107 exam at an authorized testing facility. Those are on the website, which is also linked there as well. Then once you pass that exam, you'll get your certification. Looks like that up there. It looks just like a private pilot license, except it's not. It says UAS on it. Moving on to what you can then apply for after you get your foundational certification, your Part 107, is the Part 137, and that's for agricultural drone operations. What this allows you to do is take off heavier than 55 pounds, which you would be with the payload because it counts that. Allows you to, depending on the waivers that you get, also allows you to do certain things beyond visual line of sight, things like that we'll talk more about in a moment. But let's talk about how do we define a agricultural drone operation first. If you're dispensing anything from the drone at all, doesn't matter what it is really, at the end of the day, you are defined under the FAA guidelines as an agricultural operation. Plant nourishment, soil treatment, all of that. The thing is, water comes into question. We usually get that question. Yeah, if you're spraying anything, think of it that way, you're going to need this 137 certification. The purpose of the 137 and the reason it came about is because there's a few factors. The aircraft worthiness was a big one. FAA certifies the airframe on these drones. You see some of these drones coming on the scene, they're really, really good. Before you buy that drone, make sure that it's a drone that has received airworthiness certification so you can add it to your Part 137. We're going to go through what that looks like, how you add it to your Part 137. But there's some cases where a drone may take months to get approval to be added to the 137. Also, pilot certification and understanding operational limitations of the drone. That's huge, and that's why the FAA has the 137. They just want to make sure that you know your safety procedures. Part of knowing your safety procedures, having all your safety documentation in order if it's recalled by the FAA, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. Any questions on the overview of the 137 before we go into it? I do want to talk a little bit about some statistics because this process was streamlined. A couple years ago, it took 2 years to get 137 certified through the FAA, and it was tightly coupled with the private pilot license. You had to get some exemptions that decoupled the 137 from the private pilot's license, so it was a lot more cumbersome to go through that process. They have since streamlined that process midway through 2023. We'll talk about the biggest part of the process here in a workflow where that's made the most improvement, but essentially they determined that flying an agricultural drone is a lot lower risk than flying manned aircraft. So once they deemed it low risk, then they were able to decouple a lot of those requirements. So the self-administered portion, that's the impact. And that's a lot of your documentation that you need to have with you at all times and to get your 137 approval. Now they don't even have you submit the documentation. When you apply for your 137, they just need you to sign off saying that you have the documentation and it can be recalled by them for review. So this isn't as daunting as it looks. It's actually pretty straightforward. There's two phases in yellow. There's the application phase and the issuance phase. We're just going to go through them both, but the application phase, starting over here at number 1, we're going to petition for exemption, but before we do that, we've got to understand a couple things, the weight and what we're dispensing, right? So the first decision point, do you plan for your operation to dispense from the drone? If you don't, then you're a Part 107 commercial operation, and you just want to get waivers that are pertinent to your operation in number 4. And what I mean by that is if you need to fly at night for your operation under a 107, that's a waiver. Or fly over people, that's a waiver. So those are the waivers we're talking about there. That would end the process for you. You're 107, you don't need any more certification, you just have to apply for those waivers. And there's a link there to help you do that. If we go back up to number 2, if we are dispensing from the drone, then we have to determine if we're over 55 pounds with a full payload. And if we are, or let's say if we're not first, okay, because then that's going to take us up to number 6, then you're still a 107. But the waivers you have to apply for in number 7 are different. So you have to apply for carriage of hazardous material under Part 107 and some 137. There's the carriage of hazardous materials under the 137 threshold. Back to number 5, we are dispensing and we're over 55 pounds. That's going to apply to most applicators out there, agricultural applicators. So that takes us to number 8. We're now a Part 91 operation in the eyes of the FAA, so we have to petition for many exemptions under this 137. They're listed there with the links that give you full descriptions of what each one means and how to apply for them. Then you pause. You wait. That can take 3 months to 8 months. It varies depending on the workload with the FAA. There's a lot of dependencies there on how long that takes. But you would get an approval from the FAA that you've been certified at that point. Takes you down to the issuance phase. This was the biggest impacted area when the FAA streamlined their process. That starts here in number 10. You just fill out a form. It's listed here. You submit it to the website. It's listed. And within 7 to 10 days, you receive your certificate. It's your operations certificates. You have what you need now to fly. Now there's some dependencies up here in that first phase I'm going to talk about here in just a moment, but before I do that, are any questions on this?
Cost? What's the cost associated?
So the Part 107, if you want to know, going from 107 to 137, you'd have about, depending on the training that you opt for, you'd have about $350, $375 into the testing. It could be right around $400 roughly. But then if you do any training, you order any manuals, books, that type of thing. With the 137, I don't think they're charging for that. You just apply for it. There might be some fees associated. I don't think there is anymore, though. There was in the early stage.
I just went through it, so no, there was no.
There's not, okay. So there's no fees. So to get you to the point where you have your 137, under 500, let's call it that.
Are you going to talk about the medical waiver or the medical clearance that you have to receive? Because that's the other.
Yeah.
When we filled out our AAOC, I added another pilot that hasn't actually had medical clearance yet, so I had to take him off basically because he wasn't technically employed yet.
And that's a waiver now.
Oh, okay.
That's new.
Okay.
This just in. So we talked about the application phase and the issuance phase already. So those were the 2 sections we just went through. Additional links to give you additional information on that available there. Here's what I want to talk about now, and one is the 3rd class medical certificate. Okay? That's a big one. For that, actually, so to answer your question more completely, there is a charge for that. So that doesn't go to the FAA, that goes to the medical examiner, but it's usually around $100. So there's a charge for that. Used to be 2nd class. They changed that within the last year and a half to 3rd class now. This is a big one, documenting your operation. There's a link there to give you some examples, but really what we're talking about there is the operations manual, crew resource manual, and safety and risk manual. These are exhaustive, detailed manuals that really step you through, or step the FAA through your operation. They refer to one as a ConOps manual. It's a concept of operations. Again, steps them through what you intend to do with your operation and how you're going to assure the safety of the people that are working with you in your operation. Again, that is self-administered now. You don't have to submit those forms. That just changed recently. You used to have to submit it when you applied for your 137. Now, you just hang on to them. You want to make sure you have them. If anything ever comes up, the FAA is going to want to see those first. There's also 2 certifications that you need from the Ohio Department of Agriculture. So depending on what you're doing. So if you're working for somebody in a spray applicator, then you just need your applicator's license from the Ohio Department of Agriculture. It's just one test. But if you want to start your own commercial business spraying other crops, you also need a commercial license from the Ohio Department of Agriculture. So potentially 2 licenses that you need from them. This is a big one. I just want to spend a minute on registering your aircraft. The reason I've got it listed separately down here is because that one catches a lot of people off guard. And the reason for that is this process that you see up top here, you've got to buy your drone clear back here. So you've got to have your drone, you've got to have the drone registered, and you've got to list that drone and serial number on your application. So what that means is that you could end up with a drone that you can't legally fly throughout the duration of that process. So how do you register it? Well, you get a tail number, and that tail number is just like a standard aircraft tail number. Use that and the serial number as part of your application. Obtain liability insurance, that's a big one. So speaking of cost, definitely look at that before you decide to purchase a drone. You're required to have liability insurance. It can be anywhere, if we were to estimate the ranges, can be anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 a year per drone, depending on whether you just want liability or whether you want to cover the drone as well.
And on the ODA certification, as I understand it, so traditionally in the agricultural space, does every single one of us that operate in retail, does every one of your operators have a commercial pesticide applicator license when they sit in the cab every day? Do they have to? Because they can operate under the authorization of someone on site that actually has the commercial certification. That is, to my understanding, that's not true in the drone space. You as a drone operator, if you're a drone operator, you have to have all the licenses, okay? That's a significant difference from the way we've traditionally operated as it relates to commercial certification. I don't know if it requires, I have to fill that out every time, but I don't know if it's required.
Applicator license only, if
Okay.
you're spraying for somebody with the commercial license. Yeah, and you're using their drone to fly. Yeah. And that's the same with the 137 too.
Yeah.
Just the owner of the hardware needs the 137. Everybody else has to have the applicator license and the Part 107 and the medical certificate as well. Any other questions? So just to recap on these exemptions, the options here, whether you have a 107 or a 137, just want to make you aware what those are. Because you can fly over people, you can fly with multiples, you can fly at night. Beyond visual line of sight's a big one for the agriculture space, especially if you're in a region of the state that has hilly terrain, because you need a visual observer. As soon as you get your 137, it'll say in there, you've got to have a visual observer. You cannot lose sight of the drone at any given moment during the operation. If you do, somebody else has to have sight of it and constant communication with you. So that's also a waiver. So the FAA wants you to get these. It's just, it takes time, and you have to go through the application process for these two. There is an additional step for that.
And I'll say on this, Doug, again, because we're at the very end of our process. AOC, I had a couple things I had to change. We were granted, without submitting a waiver, swarm, night operation, and OVO.
That's because you know people.
So I think
great.
those rules have changed. Is when you submit that 137, you don't actually have to go back and submit for those waivers, because I expected that, and that's not.
Did they do that just recently?
They must have, because we just went through that process starting in like November.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
That
great.
was a significant change, because I expected to have to call Paul again.
I knew you knew people. So yeah, that's great. That's good news. Definitely, I want to update this too, that being the case. So yeah, thank you for that. Any other questions about the waivers? Okay, some statistics here. Any guesses in the room how many Part 137 operators we have since the Inception of the certification till now? Any guesses? Nope. 1,250. So that's not a lot of competition, and we have a lot of acres to cover, so there's a lot of need for this. That's the point there. The demand is really high, and we don't have a lot of operators. So if it's something you're considering, definitely know that. And that's across the US, not statewide, of course. That second half of that workflow, 5 business days from the time of submission. So the long pole intent, of course, is that first part, but once you get that, 5 days, you'll get your certificate. Some of the approval challenges, mentioned one earlier, you have to have your drone, right? So meaning you could have a drone you can't fly right out of the gate, and then keep in mind that's just another reinforcement there that the exemption issued has to match the drone that you bought before you start the process. So what if you just have land and you want to hire a drone operation to spray the row crops or spread cover crop for you? Just some things to look out for here. You want to make sure they're certified. And the way you do that is you ask them for 2 things. The operator certificate, right? Because that was the output of the first part of that workflow. And you ask for proof of insurance. Those are 2 biggest things because you want them covered for liability with something like that. Secondly, they're going to have that tail number I mentioned earlier. It's got to be displayed on the drone body or an arm, but it's got to be visible. You okay?
We're good.
But that tail number has to be visible. So once you see that tail number, that operator arrives, you can click the link here and it'll take you to the airman database, or I'm sorry, the tail number registration at this link, and that'll show you who owns that drone. If it's a corporate drone, you'd see that. You'll be able to see who it's registered to, as well as the airman database. So you have the name of the operator. You can look up the operator's name. It'll also show you whether or not they have their 2nd or 3rd class. And I say both of those because the rules were you needed your 2nd class, and then they changed that. Or excuse me, other way around, 3rd class, and they changed that. So there's a lot more we could talk about. So fire away. Let's get the conversation going. Sir?
Back to those exemptions.
Yeah.
So you've got to apply for them. Is there really any, will you get rejected on those if you apply for them and fill out your paperwork right? Are they actually looking into, well, this guy really shouldn't be doing no visual observer or any of that, or if you fill it out, you're going to probably get the exemption?
Well, they're going to want to see, at least this is how it was. Now it might have changed. But they're going to want to see your operations manuals, and they're going to see how you mitigate risk. So you'd have to spell out in those detailed manuals I referred to when you got your 137 that you have to have with you at all times, and they might recall it to review it. That's when they'll want to review it. So when you apply for it, if they see that this is what you do in the event of emergency, if you're flying over people and your operation is set up the safest way it can, they'll give it to you. Biggest thing is risk. They want you to do it safely.
And my recommendation, if anybody in the audience is interested in pursuing a 137 certificate, talk to myself or Doug. Paul, nothing against the FAA, but they're a stickler on the paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
We'll help you. Some of the things aren't necessarily clear how you should fill those out. We can help you with that. Because that can slow the process down. That's why, Paul, I sent you that email like, Paul, you need update on the process? Because I did misunderstand what I needed to enter in one cell, and that slowed my process down a little bit. But
Part of the streamlining process was when we originally started doing this, you probably noticed we talk about Part 91. This is all Code of Federal Regulations that were related
Correct.
to manned aircraft. So Part 137 are your crop dusters, your helicopters.
Correct.
They took those rules and tried to push them into the unmanned world. And so a lot of those things had to get changed over time and continues to change. It was taking us a long time for each of the field offices to do these certifications, go out and do proof testing and watch sprays and all that. And they moved it to a more streamlined process with an individual single group nationally. So things are getting easier and trying to make it where you can buy these things and make a living and use them for your business. So those things are a lot more, as we've learned and grown, we've tried to make it easier on the stakeholders of the country.
Once you do all these things, is it good indefinitely? Is it a time limit?
107.
107.
Yeah, the 107 has to be renewed every 2 years. And your medical, is it?
5 now.
Is it, but it's under a certain age. Is it under 45? It's 5
that's
years,
a-
and then over
that's a great
45,
point.
it's 2
40.
years?
Yeah.
I'm an old guy, so I have to go more frequently, unfortunately.
But again, those are medical rules for manned aircraft, and so there's people that are talking to the congressman, sending in requests to try to make changes that are just for unmanned operators. So we're trying to be cognizant of who should be able to fly an unmanned aircraft as opposed to a manned aircraft.
And Doug mentioned it, as you do add new equipment, that has to go onto your 137 certificate.
Yes, that's right. Yep, that
So
registration.
it's not just a one and done if you're adding new equipment. You're going to have to revisit that and add that waiver for that 137 for that new equipment with the FAA.
Yeah, you want to register it under, if it's an LLC or if it's your name
Right.
specifically, just register it the same, because however you apply for the 137, you want the same name.
That's
on
what
that
got me.
waiver.
For some reason, it was tied to me, and I'm like, it's not me, it's Heritage Cooperative.
Yes.
But my name was tied to it, and I had to change that, which frustrates me, but that's a different conversation.
So there's no grandfather in this, so it's every 2 years, you'll have to change, if something's been added, that's when they'll add it.
Well, no, the 2-year requirements for the Department of Commercial certificate, which just means you go back and take a short test.
Right.
It's online.
It's correctable 100%, and
Yeah.
you're good for another 2 years. We have that online, and it's free, and it's easy to do.
Yep.
It's not a big deal.
So this is going to get into my talk. So does anybody see any challenges with the old 137 rules, or maybe the existing 137 rules? If you don't have an exemption waiver for operating multiple drones simultaneously, that means for every drone in the air, I've got to have an operator, a PIC, a PIC, a pilot in command, and I've got to have a visual observer. Does anybody see a problem with that if I want to have multiple drones in the air at the same time? If I have 2 drones, how many people do I have to have at that operation? If I want to have 3, 6, does anybody see a problem with that operationally? It starts to become fairly cost prohibitive. Okay, and this is why I wanted Doug to go first, to bring all this to you. So the one thing you didn't talk about, what about NOTAMs?
Yeah, they've actually streamlined that quite a bit.
They have,
too.
actually, but-
Now you can do it on an app.
Yep.
Yeah, so that makes it nice.
So what is a NOTAM? Just for, we're talking to people that don't speak our
Well,
language.
it was notice to airmen, then it was notice to air mission, and it might get so right now it's notice to air mission, so you need to register on an app, and I think it's a loft air control.
It is a loft, yeah.
Okay, so a loft air control app. You go in, you just basically place a marker on the field where you're going to be flying and the time duration that you're going to be flying. You have to do it within 24 hours. And then that way, if FAA gets a call, I assume there's a link back to the NOTAM.
You may be in an airspace that's under a temporary flight restriction, or maybe within a certain distance of an airport that has an instrument landing system where aircraft can be directed in, certain altitudes and certain directions. And so that area map, that facility map that is linked within that link in that app will kind of make sure you don't put that aircraft in an unsafe area that might impede
Yeah.
helicopters.
In advance is the right way to say that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because before it was 72, right? And that was painful for us.
Yeah.
To keep up with that, because weather patterns, windy, we have to change our dates. And so I had a dedicated person that all she did was submit NOTAMs during peak season. Number one, that's a boring job. I can't imagine that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But it was hard to keep up with, and that was a real hindrance to operations. It genuinely was.
NOTAMs are what every pilot checks before they fly.
They fly, correct.
So they know what's going on in the airspace they're going to be in. So if I'm flying tomorrow, I check my NOTAMs and it says, we have agricultural drones in such and such area over by Zanesville. I'll know to look out for them.
It's funny you say Zanesville, Paul. So that's a very specific example. So my experiences with DJI drones. So anybody XAG or any of the other manufacturers, don't assault me. Doesn't mean that I'm necessarily a huge fan of the Chinese. It's the best drones that we have and the cheapest ones that we operate. On the DJI drones, if I'm trying to operate in controlled airspace, and if I try to go through and get a link submission, is it LINC? No.
Lance?
Lance, thank you, Lance submission, to try to get clearance to operate in that airspace. Like Zanesville, we have one customer's field. Part of the field is in that controlled airspace, part of it is not. We cannot operate in that controlled airspace. The drone physically will not go beyond. That is correct. Do the other drone, and the reason I ask that, do the other drone manufacturers have that same kind of control on their software, that as you approach controlled airspace, if you don't have an authorization code that allows you to penetrate it, the drone just stops?
Some of the newer ones I'm not really familiar with, but I think that's ADAS, and I think that they all have it.
Okay.
Yeah, they should. That's a big selling point for them.
And it's
now.
Zanesville. When you said Zanesville, that is the worst place for me to fly.
Yeah, Lance, it's low altitude.
I can't remember what Lance stands for.
Authorization.
And that's not a Lance facility, so we're talking language that nobody else understands. So to get, you can operate in controlled airspace, but you have to have authorization to penetrate that controlled airspace. Lance allows you to do that electronically with an app, and you can get approval within 10 seconds. But it has to be a Lance-approved airport, and not all airfields are Lance-approved. Zanesville is obviously one of them.
And the reason why is their Class E or G airspace goes to the surface.
That is, I believe it's Class E that goes to the surface. That's correct.
Two airports in Ohio that are like that. Zanesville's one.
And check out the cards out on the table out here too, because those are airspace cards. Also, there's links on some paperwork out there, QR codes, that take you to a lot of this, right? Takes you to the drone zone, FAA drone zone. They cover all of this stuff right there, so it's all at your fingertips.
With that NOTAM stuff, does that affect whether an agricultural airplane and a drone can operate in the same area at the same time? Well, who trumps who on that case? Drones are supposed to land
Giveaway.
here or see an aircraft. You're supposed to put it down.
And this, I want to say, it is common sense. What's the threat to your drone if it gets hit by an aircraft? You break the drone. What's the threat to the guy sitting, or the guy or gal sitting in the cockpit? Their life.
Yeah.
So you always defer to manned aircraft. Always, 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 always.
Right now is 14 impacts in the United States. And a lot of it's these people trying to get pictures hovering off the end of runways. We had one ingested in the left engine of a corporate jet last year, or 2 years ago. We had one hit a helicopter and went through and broke the pilot's face. He lost an eye. It's the real deal. You know, we talked about swarming. You remember the Ohio State game? Did you see the drone light show? That same company, we did their approval and did observation on that. They went and did the same type of show in Florida the next week, and one of those drones fell and hit a kid on the head. So imagine something heavier than your cell phone falling from 200 or 300 feet. That battery pack, I mean, it can do some damage. So that's where a lot of this is driven.
And again, as much as it is cumbersome sometimes, it's, at the end of the day, it's all about protecting manned aircraft. That, if you think about that perspective as a drone operator, you'll do well in the space, and you won't be a problem for the FAA, to be honest with you. It's just always defer to manned aircraft.
Good questions. In the back.
We should give Paul a mic.
Yeah, we should.
We are recording this.
If you look up Part 108, it's under, in the Federal Register, we call them proposed rulemaking, and people are asking for a more all-encompassing commercial operators certificate for specialty things like agriculture or different kinds of heat sensitive aerial imaging or whatever. So they're looking at creating that, but it's not been approved. But that's one of those things. If you just search online Part 108, it'll kind of tell you this field moves so fast that we have a hard time keeping up because it's ever changing. And we are trying to help people use these things to advance business, to make a living with them, to do it safely. So we're constantly making changes, and things are constantly happening. So best place to go is FAA.gov and just look up what's the most current information.
That's a great question. Go ahead, Doug, please.
It is a good question. I know you're referring to probably the section of the Part 107 you've heard about where you have to know how to talk to air traffic control. understand markings on runways, things like that. But honestly, if you're flying around an airport, not everybody is, but everybody has to understand it. So, good question.
I do have a question for you, Doug, because we both operate. Do you have on a radio? Do you have a shortwave radio that's monitoring air traffic when you're operating around a landing strip that doesn't have a tower?
I do.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't.
There's actually.
I do have a ham license, but I don't do that.
Actually, an app for your phone too.
Oh, okay.
For that, so.
Are any of you private pilots certificated?
Yes. Where's Robert? I see Rusty, but where's?
If you already hold a current private pilot certificate, then you take a 30-question test, and you can get your 107 that way. So essentially, the airspace version of the private pilot written exam is what the test is.
30 question. Other questions? It's good conversation.
Yes, sir.
You touched on OABA. Could you shed more light on the DJI situation? I'd like to implement a scouting drone and data collection, but I've been dragging my feet because of the situation with DJI. I'd like to update.
So Doug, do you want to tackle that? Do you want me to try to tackle it first, and you can correct me, and then Paul can ultimately correct us both? As
Go ahead.
as I understand it, the way the legislation is currently drafted, will it affect the use of DJI drones in North America or United States? Yes. As I understand it, the existing drone technology will not be affected. So we can still use the drones that we have at our disposal today. So if you're flying a Mavic 3, is there a Mavic 4 out yet?
The 3M's the biggest one for
Okay.
data collection.
So if you're flying one that's already authorized, whatever happens in the future will not affect your ability to operate that drone unless they redraft the legislation and vote on it. What it will really impact is additional technology from DJI coming over here. We won't necessarily have access to that newer drone technology. That's my understanding.
Yeah, and just to add to that, DJI in response to that bill has shut off data collection. So they're no longer sending the data offshore. And it's easy enough to see that when you operate the drone. You used to be able to go back in and see your flight history that went way, way back.
Correct.
You could see everywhere you flew. You could even, pull the map up. Not anymore. They pulled that. So those, like the Mavic 3M, you don't retain that because it's all local on the device.
Did that answer the question? I mean, that's a great question.
Yeah, I guess I would follow up in the discussion of, if I want to begin that process, would I even consider DJI, or should I just look for another brand?
Once you have the drone, they're not going to take it from you.
Correct. And as long as DJI is still manufacturing products to upgrade your existing drone, I don't know what you're missing out on with the T50, T60, T70, or whatever the next iteration is.
Yep. Good question. Other questions? Okay, well, I'll turn it over to Robert. Thank you. I appreciate it.
That worked out perfectly. You left me no time, which is exactly what I wanted. That was
You
intentional.
probably want this. You got 10 minutes.
How do I get? There we go. They're like, stop. Just thank you, sir.
Yeah.
And you're welcome to stay standing because Doug operates drones as well. So this isn't. So what I really wanted to talk on and focus on is, it's not as cool as it is to operate a drone, and it's really cool. Don't let me kid you. It's actually fun. It's also very frustrating at times. One of the most important things that you can do to increase the efficiency of your operation has nothing to do with you flying the drone. It has everything to do with what you're doing on the ground when you're preparing to go and service a field, when you're out operating in a field. How do you keep that drone aloft longer? Because as long as the drone's in the air, you're probably making money. When your drone's sitting on the ground, I know you're not making any money. Okay, and that's what most people, it's the hidden cost of this operation that most people don't have a familiarity with, right? And it's just because you have an operator there. We were there 2 years ago and we started our own operations internally. We didn't understand exactly, we had an idea of what we were in for, but we really didn't know. So setting up your trailer, again, you're doing a tendered operation activity that is going to require some bulk container that I actually take product from, put it in my drone, and send the drone on its mission. How many have ever dealt with tender trailers? How many have ever dealt with hot mixing product in the field? It's super fast, right? It takes like 2 seconds. It can, okay? But when you're talking about drone platforms, what products are you putting into the tank? Are they compatible? Do I need to think about agitation? Because what's the biggest difference between a ground-driven operation from a ground applicator and a drone? the concentration of the solution in the tank is dramatically different. Right? If you're operating with a traditional fungicide application, I'm not going to use fungicide, a herbicide application, what's the labeled application rate? What's your GPA typically going to be? 10 to 20 to 30 gallons per acre. Can you do that with a drone? And the answer is you can. You just can't afford to do it with a drone. You can achieve that, but you can't afford it because you're going to have to, it's going to take you so long just to cover an acre because your application rates are so high. Because think about the payload that these drones can deliver. What's the biggest gallonage tank that we have out there in the commercial space? I think, is it the XIGP 150? Does anybody know what the capacity is? Okay, so 18.5 gallons. You're applying fungicide at 2 gallons per acre. How many, assuming the battery life lasts long enough, which is maybe a good or a bad assumption, assuming the battery life lasts long enough, how many acres could I theoretically cover? Simple math, 9 acres. Okay? That becomes your limitation. Your payload capacity does become your limitation. And if you're talking about mixing multiple products in solution, you'd better know how to mix. We've learned the hard way how to mix. Because plugging up a bunch of screens, not terribly efficient for drone operations if you're having to clean screens. Now, it depends upon the technology you're using as well. So the T30 uses a traditional flat fan nozzle, right? Just like you buy from T-Jet. What do the T40s and the T50s use? And again, don't accost me because I'm talking DJI. I'm only there because that's the technology I'm familiar with. They don't use flat fan nozzles. What do they use? Centrifugal nozzles, okay? Does that give you a little bit more flexibility? Yeah, but they also have screens, right? Know how to mix, know about the products you're putting into solution, do some tar testing. That was, how about jar testing? Do some jar testing. We actually have done a lot of that ourselves in-house to make sure we have compatible products. The other things you've got to have, so I've got to have a tote that's got water in it, most likely. Got to have a gigantic generator. Batteries are the bane to drone operation in agricultural space, period. The batteries are the problem. The drones themselves work fairly consistently, but batteries, keeping a battery charged, keeping up with batteries so that you can keep your drone in the air can start to become a problem. If there's any deviation in whether, if it's really hot, they charge and dissipate really quick. They charge slowly and they dissipate quickly. If it's really cold, they charge really slow. Okay, it's just a function of the batteries that we're using in the space. Batteries will be your problem. Make sure you have a good enough generator. So Ben, if I remember your days at Rentizo, you recommended like a 9,000 watt generator. We bought a 15, and I'm still not sure it's big enough to keep up with our operations if I have 2 pilots operating simultaneously. Sorry, I missed the first part of that. How many batteries would you recommend for a drone? At a minimum 4, to be honest with you, just so you can keep up. If everything's working well, you can cycle those pretty efficiently and never have a problem. For us, running 15,000 watt generator, trying to power 2 power supplies to charge 4 drones at the same time, we start to fall behind pretty quickly. It's just not enough. You either need 2 generators or you need a bigger generator yet. The biggest thing on the generator, just in the interest of time, it needs to be able to put out 240 volts. Do not rely on 110. It will not work, period. You need a 240 watt output or 240 volt output. Maximize the number of watts you're delivering to that battery. Okay? 110 just will not keep up. We have had no good experience with 110s. Drawing field boundaries. There's a lot of ways to draw field boundaries. We talk about this and we rail about this all the time. And it doesn't just affect us in the drone operational space. For any of us that deal with operations and we're trying to figure out just how many acres is this applicator going to go service, is that the accurate number, right? Because that affects how much product we put in the tank. It's even more critical in the drone space. We operate a specific way to maximize keeping up with our inventory, right? So if we know the plan is 75 acres, we're probably going to mix for like 60, figure out where we're at, get a clue of how much more we need to mix to finish off the field. Because the worst thing you can do is have product in the tank and not have anywhere to put it, right? We deal with that on the bigger scale side as well with ground rigs, but it's still a problem in small aerial applications with drones. A lot of pictures. I'm a picture guy anymore. And this comes back to the safety of these drone operations. Doug, how many times have you flown up to fields on a field that's right up next to what I would consider a pretty significant highway? Any of our other drone operators experience this? How many of your butt puckers just a little bit more as you're approaching the edge of the field? You're like, I know that drone's going to stop, but I really hope it does stop.
And then add power lines.
Oh, the power lines. Yeah, power lines. and it's really difficult. And your comment, and Paul, maintaining visual line of sight, this is a real challenge in corn operations for anybody that's done corn. You need to have a lumber rack or something. When I grew up, it was called a headache rack on top of your vehicle to get you high enough elevation so that you can see, because operating on corn from the ground, you better have an elevated position because otherwise you're not going to be able to see the drone. Wheat, it's pretty doable. You don't necessarily have to have an elevated position, but for corn, it's absolutely required. And there are several times, I'm going to be honest with Paul here, with the FAA in the room, there are times when, he's covering his ears, there are times when I can try to get into a position to see, and you still can't get in a good enough position to see. And it's that last 2 acres, right? It's never the whole field, it's that last 2 acres on that back edge. That can be difficult. That can be very, very difficult. And it's because we're in eastern Ohio, Paul, not western Ohio is a little different. Eastern Ohio's got a lot more hills, a lot more trees, a lot more obstacles.
And that's a good illustration where the tree line comes out into the field. That's
Correct.
Where, yeah.
That's the purpose. The other challenge with drawing field boundaries is we're typically relying upon satellite imagery that may be 9 to 10 years old. And it's, for some reason, every field we go to, it's a winter image. So how does that affect, if you took this as a winter image, these aren't pine trees, by the way, this is deciduous forest. I don't know how far those limbs extend to the field. So when I draw my field boundary, I'm actually flying right into trees. That isn't that big of a deal because the sensors will pick it up during the operation. But the problem is when that drone approaches a tree line, it's going to get confused and say, I'm just going to stop. And anytime your drone stops, you're just killing battery, and it's going to negatively affect your operation because you're not going to cover as many acres as you possibly could. Okay? And again, I'm not poo-pooing any of this. I just want you to be aware of the challenges associated with drone operations. I think a lot of people do have the capacity to do this. I have absolutely no doubt about that. Also be aware of labels. How many read labels religiously? I have to for my job. I have to look at labels all the time. There's a lot of herbicide products specifically that are labeled for aerial application, but the devil's in the details. They have different GPA rates than what you probably want to operate on as a drone operator, right? So there's a glufosinate product. You can't apply it aerially at 5 gallons per acre. Is that going to work for drone operations, Doug?
Nope. Not
okay. So just be aware. You need to make sure you pay attention to the labels. Just because it's labeled for aerial doesn't mean it's a product you necessarily want to use. And we primarily position drones operationally with fungicide applications. We do target herbicide applications, but it's a very specific period. Traditionally, it's going to be late season corn. We're trying to deal with burr cucumber issues, right, just so the combine can actually pass through the field. We don't really focus much on herbicides outside of that operation because of our concerns with drift, right? Because you think about a ground application compared to a drone operation, what's the difference in height? How far are you above the target when you're running a ground rig? A foot, 20 inches? How high are you above when you're flying a drone? 10 to 12 feet? Is anybody more concerned with drift at that height compared to something that's right off the top of the canopy? And unfortunately, we may or may not have been burned by that, no pun intended. Actually, we didn't get burned, but somebody did. If you're looking for some information on the agronomic performance of drones, Auburn University, we had that speaker, was that last year or maybe it was 2 years ago? My memory's getting so bad I can't remember. He talked a lot more about the herbicide efficacy, which I was amazed at how well it worked. University also has a lot of information as it relates to drone operations and specifically looking at labels and how you can use various products from a drone platform. This is what happens when you don't know what you're doing mixing-wise. That actually wasn't us. That was one of our applicators, a contractor that was working with us. It wasn't Doug. Questions, because I know we're out of time. Great interaction, though. I knew that we would have that. Any other questions?
Just remind everyone right outside the door, we've got a lot of information that might be helpful.
Thank you, Paul, for coming.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you so much.
Anybody that needs CCA credit for the pesticide, raise your hand. I got the number for you. 618928. ODA, yes. 618928. We have a 15-minute break, and then we'll reconvene for corn and soybean,